Today, we're going to talk about a case that is frankly one of the most disturbing in Hong Kong's recent history. It's known as the Hello Kitty murder, and I just want to give you a heads up. The details are incredibly graphic, but you really have to hear them to understand the full scope of this tragedy.
The whole thing really boils down to this one very chilling question. How in the world does a child's toy end up as the key piece of evidence in a crime this horrific? Well, the answer starts to unfold in the spring of 1999. So it's May 24th, 1999, and police raid this apartment on a street called Granville Road. What they walk into, it isn't just a crime scene. It's something else entirely. They find a Hello Kitty mermaid doll, and stuffed inside of it is a human skull. And just like that, with one awful discovery, the case gets its unforgettable name.
But before we go any deeper into the crime itself, it's so important that we talk about the person whose life was stolen, because she was so much more than a piece of evidence. She was a woman named Fan Man-yee.
Fan Man-yee was only 23 years old. At the time, she was working as a nightclub hostess. But more than anything, she was a brand new mom to an infant son. And her life was just incredibly difficult right from the start. She was abandoned as a kid and grew up in an orphanage. By the time she was 15, she was out on her own, and she fell into homelessness, drug addiction, and eventually prostitution just to get by. She ended up marrying a client who was abusive, but then in 1998, she had her son, and he became her reason to change everything. She quit drugs, got out of prostitution, and was fighting to build a better life for him, even though money was a constant struggle. And that dream of a new life, it was all destroyed over something so small it's hard to believe: a stolen wallet. That one act would trigger a month of absolute, unimaginable horror.
So here's how it all started. Pham stole a wallet from a triad member named Chan Man Lok. It had about 4,000 Hong Kong dollars in it. But his demand wasn't just for his money back. Oh no, he tacked on an extra $10,000 fee. She managed to return the money she took, but she just couldn't come up with the rest. And that unpaid debt, that's what cost her everything.
On March 17th, she was kidnapped. It was Chan Man Lok, two of his friends, and also a 14-year-old girl. For the next month, they held her captive in that same apartment on Granville Road. The things they did to her, they're truly monstrous. She was beaten, she was burned, just relentless, systematic torture. Sometime around the middle of April, she died from her injuries. And to hide what they'd done, they dismembered her body, boiled the remains, and got rid of almost everything, except for her skull, which they hid inside that doll. For over a month, no one knew what happened. The crime was a secret, trapped inside the walls of that apartment. The police had nothing to go on. The break in the case came from a place that no one could have ever predicted. And honestly, it's pretty chilling.
The person who finally blew the whistle on this whole nightmare was the youngest one there, that 14-year-old girl, Lau Ming-fong. If it wasn't for her, we might never know what really happened to Fan Man-yee.
So you have to ask yourself, right? What could possibly make someone who took part in something so awful just come forward and tell everyone what they did?
And this is where the story takes maybe its most bizarre turn. The confession wasn't because of guilt, not in the way you'd think. The girl told the police she was being haunted. She said she was having these intense nightmares of Fan Man-yee's ghost every single night, and it just became too much for her to handle.
These constant nightmares, they led to a total nervous breakdown. She finally broke down and told a social worker everything she saw, everything she did. And on May 24th, she's the one who led the police right to that apartment door and right to that horrific scene.
So now there's a confession, there's evidence, and the case finally heads to court. Let's take a look at what happened in the legacy this case has left behind.
The three men, Chan Man Lok, Leong Wai Lun, and Leong Xing Cho, all went on trial, and they were all found guilty. They got prison sentences, but look at the verdict. It wasn't murder, it was manslaughter.
So you might be wondering, why manslaughter? How is this not murder? Well, legally, it all came down to proving intent. Because they had destroyed so much of her body, the jury couldn't be 100% sure what the exact cause of death was. They couldn't rule out something like a drug overdose. So while everyone agreed she died because of what they did, they couldn't legally prove that they intended for her to die.
But the judge, Justice Peter Nguyen, he didn't mince words. What he said at the sentencing really tells you everything you need to know about how the court saw this crime. He said, "Never in Hong Kong in recent years has a court heard of such cruelty, depravity, callousness, brutality, violence, and viciousness." But the story doesn't really end there. The apartment building itself, the one on Granville Road, they tore it down in 2012. It just had too dark of a history. It's a hotel now. One of the men, Leong Shing Cho, got his sentence reduced and was actually released in 2014, only to be sent back to prison in 2022 for another crime. As for Fan Man-yee's skull, that single piece of evidence from the trial, it was finally given back to her family. They were able to cremate it in 2004, a full 5 years after she was killed. And that leaves us with a really tough question, doesn't it? The men who did this went to prison, but one of them is already out. The building is gone. A young mother's life was completely destroyed over a few $1,000s. It really makes you wonder, when a crime is this inhuman, what does justice even look like?